Story 1. TIFU. By ignoring all the red flags, a few years ago, I agreed to meet up an offer-up seller to buy a bicycle for $200. There were multiple red flags that I consciously acknowledged but chose to ignore. The seller already had the bicycle posted for a decent price, but I figured why not shoot an offer and try to get a better deal. Worst they could say was no, or so I thought. The seller agreed to the offer and we scheduled to meet a few hours later that day. The city of the meetup location was the first red flag. Definitely not the safest city, and I would see a reason why. But I proceed to head over to the park for the meet. As soon as I get off the freeway, I notice that this area does not look like the best part of this already unsafe city. I continue on. I pull up to the park and see multiple families and think this shouldn't be too bad. There's several people around, so I message the seller and he tells me to meet him near the bathrooms at the back end of the parking lot. Okay, on my way. I move my car to the designated, much more secluded meeting area where I see three guys, probably in their mid to late teens, with the bike I'm there to buy. Oh, I want it. I attempt to greet the three fine young gentlemen holding onto my soon-to-be ride, but there was no response, so I ask if I could check out the bike, to which one of them actually speaks and says yes. After a quick look over, I tell the non-mute young buck that I'll take the bike and give him the cash. Instead of letting go of the bike and handing it over to me, the one holding the bike says he'll help me load it in my car. Sure, I'm right over here. As we start walking the 15 feet to my car, the three youngsters turn in the wrong direction. I try to say hey, my car is right here, but they keep walking, so I say hey, where y'all going? The response was definitely not what I anticipated, but looking back, I know I put myself in the situation. One of these bad boys turns around and lifts his shirt just enough to reveal the handle of a handgun in his waistband. Definitely not worth it, and I was not going to FAFO if it was actually real or not. I immediately stop and watch as they duck through a hole in the chain link fence and down into the wash with my bike and my $200. I call my girlfriend, fuming, and tell her what happened. She asks if I had called the cops. That's probably a good idea, given the unsavory nature of this city and the mention of a gun, or maybe it was a slow day. The local police showed up within 10 minutes and I see/hear a helicopter overhead. I tell them my story and they say that criminals in the area prey on folks from out of town. Although I graduated college in the same city, so I was familiar, lol. The officer gives me a police report number and tells me a detective would be in contact. Never heard anything after that day. The officer also suggested meeting at a bank where there are cameras, or at the police station. They have designated rooms to conduct that type of business. Also, preferably do not go alone. Story 2. TIFU. By accidentally gaslighting my roommate. So, I rent a house with two other people. One of them is 26M and has ADD, and is terribly scatterbrained, to the point where he struggled to keep a job. Something that really bothered me was that he'd often leave dirty dishes on the counter and just forget to do them. It would often be days before he'd notice or remember them. Sometimes I'd remind him and he'd say he'd do it but then forget again. I knew that he wasn't doing it on purpose, because he'd also forget things that inconvenienced him, e.g. cooking a large batch of food, leaving it to cool and then forgetting to put in the fridge later, wasting his time and money. I like to think I'm a considerate person. I started reminding him if I noticed it was getting late and his food was still out. I'd also put his milk back in the fridge, or other things he'd forget about that could spoil. I also started doing his dishes if he left them out for more than a day, because it really bothered me and I honestly prefer doing them to having the awkward conversation. If he noticed, he would ask me if I did them, and then apologize for leaving them out and ask me to just tell him to do them instead. But I'd done that and he'd forget again, so I'd just be dealing with the awkwardness for nothing. One day he asked me when I hadn't actually done the dishes, so I said no. He shrugged and said he must have just done them and forgotten that he had. The next time he asked, I was frustrated and a light bulb went off in my head. I could say no and he'd probably assume he'd just forgotten doing them. I said I hadn't, and it went exactly as I'd thought. I felt like a huge weight was off my shoulders. I could enjoy a cleaner home without having to play mommy to this guy. From then on I always denied doing his dishes, sometimes other things too. One time he went on a 3-week trip and I went in his room and took out the dirty dishes and emptied his trash to prevent pests, because we'd struggled with flies. After a couple of months, he mentions to me that he's seeking a proper diagnosis and medical treatment for his ADD. In this country it's not particularly easy to get diagnosed and it costs a good amount money or a years-long waitlist. I encouraged him to do it because he clearly has problems. But then he admits to me that he's been particularly concerned because he's been forgetting things much more the last few months, particularly in terms of chores. And it's been disturbing him. I felt terrible. I almost confessed, but I worried about the consequences and fallout. Instead, I just tapered off doing the chores. I feel conflicted because my intentions were good and my actions also had good consequences. He told his doctor about his distress and she got him bumped up the wait list. Now he's diagnosed and on Adderall. He seems to be doing a lot better in life, less forgetful, managing to hold down a job. But I still gaslight him and caused him distress over a long period of time, so of course I feel guilty. Thanks for being here. If you enjoy this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and share it. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Take care.